I love Kellen, but it's the way you love a cousin. He's safe. He's dependable. That's not the same thing as wanting to build a life with someone. My wife said those words to her best friend in a crowded airport baggage claim. She said them freely without lowering her voice the way you talk when you're certain no one who matters is close enough to hear. I was standing 12 feet away holding a bouquet of red roses I had picked out that morning. I am not a man who chases drama. I am the man who shows up every time without being asked, without needing credit for it. I came to surprise her. What I walked away with instead was the truth about 9 years of my life. And what I did with that truth collapsed everything she had spent those 9 years building in a single night. If this kind of story resonates with you, real people, real decisions, and what it looks like when someone finally stops accepting less than they deserve, hit the subscribe button right now so you don't miss what comes next. This is Kellen's story, and we're just getting started. My father used to say that a man's worth isn't measured by what he says at a dinner table, it's measured by what he does at 2 in the morning when no one is watching. He told me that in the garage of our old house in Charlotte, while he was bent over the engine of a 1967 Chevrolet Impala that had seen better decades. I was maybe 12 years old holding a flashlight steady while he worked, and I didn't fully understand what he meant. I understand it now. My name is Kellen Price. I'm 42 years old and I work as a logistics coordinator for a transportation company near Charlotte Douglas International Airport. My job is to make sure things arrive where they're supposed to be when they're supposed to be there. I've been doing it for over a decade and I'm good at it, not because the work is glamorous, but because I show up on time, I don't cut corners, and when something goes wrong, I stay until it's right. That's the only way I know how to operate. It's the only way my father knew how to operate, and watching him was the only education in character I ever really needed. He left me 3 things when he died. The first was a house in Matthews, North Carolina, a solid, quiet neighborhood where people still wave from their driveways and know your name after one summer. The second was a family trust structured carefully by a man who understood that wealth without legal protection is just a temporary condition. The third was that Impala. It sat in my garage for 2 years under a canvas cover I barely touched. Then one evening I pulled the cover off, looked at the rust along the rear quarter panel and decided I needed to bring it back, not because I needed a project, but because I needed to remember who had taught me not to walk away from things that still had life left in them. I've been working on that car for 3 years. It's still not done. I met Talia at a community fundraiser downtown when I was 33. She walked into that room the way some people do, not loudly, but with a quiet certainty that made you pay attention without knowing exactly why. She had ideas about everything: urban development, community investment, the way certain neighborhoods in Charlotte had been written off for decades while the rest of the city moved forward without them. She talked about building something that could actually change that, and she talked about it like she had already thought through the obstacles and decided they were manageable. I listened to her for 2 hours straight and thought she was the most purposeful person I had ever been in the same room with. 6 months later, we were engaged. 9 months after that, we were married. The early years were good. I want to be honest about that because the story doesn't make sense without it. Talia was driven in a way I genuinely respected. She didn't wait for the world to rearrange itself. She went after what she wanted with both hands. When she told me she wanted to launch a consulting firm focused on community development, I didn't hesitate. We talked through what it would cost in time and money and energy, and I told her I would hold things steady while she built it. That's what I believed a marriage was. You hold things steady for each other, especially when one person is out in the wind and one person is holding the rope. The company she built was called Bellamy Collective. She named it after her mother's family. The Bellamys had been part of Charlotte's community fabric for longer than most people could trace. Talia's mother, Loretta Bellamy, was 68 years old and had spent most of those years building a name that meant something in this city. Church committees, neighborhood associations, fundraising initiatives that actually produced results. Loretta showed up for all of it the same way, without fanfare and without expecting recognition. She had the particular dignity of a person who does the right thing because it is the right thing, and that reputation had accumulated over decades into something solid. Talia understood the weight of that name, and she put it on her company because she believed it could carry the business forward. I always thought that was one of the most honest things about her. She knew where she came from and wasn't ashamed to carry it. Brielle Bellamy was Talia's closest friend, a cousin from Loretta's side who had known both of us since before the wedding. She came around the house often enough that I'd stopped thinking of her as a guest and started thinking of her as part of the household. She was direct in a way I appreciated, the kind of person who says uncomfortable things when she believes they need to be said and doesn't dress them up to make them easier to hear. I liked that about her. What I didn't know not then was that she had already said something uncomfortable to Talia several months earlier, and that Talia had told her to drop it and not bring it up again. In the months before that Friday in November, I felt the distance between us growing. Talia came home later, traveled more, and when I asked about Bellamy Collective, her answers skimmed the surface without going any deeper. I told myself it was the weight of building something from nothing, and that being a steady presence meant not adding to her pressure. Some nights when I couldn't sleep, I'd go out to the garage and sit in the Impala's driver's seat with the overhead light on and the engine off, and I'd think about the dashboard my father had rebuilt with his own hands, and I would feel, without quite knowing why, like I was missing something I should have already seen. The morning I bought those red roses, I still didn't know what it was. The roses were wrapped in brown paper, the kind that crinkles when you hold it too tight. I bought them from a shop on South Tryon Street on my lunch break. 12 stems, deep red, already open enough to be beautiful, but not so far gone that they wouldn't last the evening. It felt like a small thing to do after a long stretch of nothing small being done. 9 years together, and somewhere in the process of supporting Talia's ambitions and keeping our finances clean and showing up to everything I was supposed to show up to, I had let the small gestures slip away. The small things are usually what a marriage actually runs on. Talia had texted me around noon. "Don't worry about picking me up. I'll get a ride share home." I read the message twice, set my phone face down on my desk, and went back to a shipping manifest I'd already reviewed once that morning. By 3 o'clock, I was in my car headed toward Charlotte Douglas anyway. Not because I didn't trust her, because I missed her, and I had decided that missing someone was reason enough to drive 20 minutes with a bouquet and show up. It seemed like something we used to do without thinking about it, something we had quietly let go of. Charlotte Douglas on a Friday afternoon in November has a particular kind of busy, not frantic, just full of motion and purpose. Travelers moving through the corridors with luggage and phones and the focused energy of people who know where they're going. I found parking without much trouble, walked in through the main entrance, and made my way down the corridor toward baggage claim. I was still working out what I was going to say when I found her. I figured something would come to me. It usually did. Baggage claim 4 was past a long wall of advertising panels, airline promotions, a hotel chain, a local bank offering mortgage refinancing. I spotted Talia before she saw me. She had her back partially turned, her carry-on at her feet, standing close to Brielle in the way people stand when they don't need to raise their voices to be understood. Something in their posture, heads angled toward each other, bodies turned slightly inward against the noise of the terminal, made me slow down without consciously deciding to. I stepped behind one of the wide advertising columns. I don't know what instinct that was. I've thought about it many times since. Talia was speaking first. Her voice was low, but the terminal carried it toward me in fragments that became complete sentences. "I love Kellen," she said. "But it's the way you love a cousin. He's safe. He's dependable. That's not the same thing as wanting to build a life with someone." I did not move. Brielle said something I didn't fully catch, a question, low and cautious. Talia answered without hesitation, with the ease of someone who had been turning these thoughts over in private long enough that they no longer required any effort to voice. She said the stability had made practical sense, that my credit history and clean financial standing had made it easier to incorporate Bellamy Collective, easier to secure the early vendor relationships, easier to present herself as a founder with roots and structure. The house in Matthews gave her an address that projected permanence, exactly what a new consulting firm needed its founder to have. She said she had never planned for the marriage to last this long, but that 12 months of documented revenue would give her enough standing to walk away cleanly. Bellamy Collective was close to that mark. A few more months, maybe less. Then she said Grant's name. She said at once Grant Sutter, with a particular quality in her voice that I can only describe as relief. The way a person sounds when they stop performing for a few seconds and simply exist. She said he made her feel like herself, that she had met him twice in Charlotte already, not only during the Los Angeles trip. She said Kellen had no idea. When she mentioned the family trust, her tone shifted into something more deliberate, the way a person sounds when they move from talking about feelings to talking about plans. She said she had been looking into it, that there might be grounds to include it in the marital estate depending on how certain contributions had been structured during the marriage. She wasn't certain it would hold, but she was looking into it. Brielle didn't argue. She asked a few practical questions about the Bellamy collective timeline, about whether Grant understood the situation in the flat voice of someone who has already said what she truly thinks and been told not to say it again. There was a careful stillness in the way Brielle held herself that didn't look like agreement. It looked like a person keeping their hands very still so no one could see them shaking. I had my phone out by then. I opened the recording application, held it at my side close to the edge of the column, and kept my breathing even while the baggage carousel ran behind them and the terminal moved and hummed around us. I recorded everything. When the carousel brought Talia's checked bag around and Brielle reached for it, the conversation shifted into logistics. Their ride-share dinner, a call Talia needed to make before Sunday. Normal things. The kind of conversation that sounds like nothing from a distance. I looked down at the roses in my other hand. 12 stems, deep red, wrapped in brown paper, still fresh. I had kept them out of the car heat specifically so they wouldn't wilt before she saw them. I set them down at the base of the advertising column, not thrown, not dropped, just placed there carefully. Petals facing out the way you set down something you've decided you're no longer going to carry. Then I walked back through the main entrance the way I had come in, and I drove home alone. I didn't play the recording on the drive home. Every word was already sitting in my chest, heavy and exact, filling a shape I hadn't known was empty until that moment. I got home before her. The house was dark the way I'd left it that morning, which meant the rideshare hadn't arrived yet. I sat in my car in the driveway with the engine off, looking at the front door for a moment, and then I went inside, turned on the kitchen light, and walked straight through to the garage. I didn't turn on the overhead fluorescents, just the single work lamp clipped to the shelf above the tool chest. It threw a yellow pool of light across the Impala's hood and left everything else in shadow. I pulled up the shop stool, sat down beside the front wheel well, and set my hands on my knees without moving. The garage smelled like metal and old grease, and something underneath that, a particular scent I had never been able to name, but had always associated with my father. I sat in it and didn't try to organize what I was feeling. It wasn't anger which surprised me. Anger I could have worked with. What I kept coming back to instead was something quieter and more disorienting, a word that hadn't been spoken in that baggage claim, but that I could hear clearly underneath everything Talia had said. The word was arrangement. Not a life I had believed I was building, an arrangement. A structure of benefits she had entered deliberately, and planned to exit on a specific timeline once the conditions were right. I sat with that word for a long time, turning it over, the way my father used to turn over a corroded bolt before deciding whether it could be saved. When I heard the rideshare pull up outside, I stood, walked back into the kitchen, and set a glass of water on the counter. By the time Talia came through the door, I looked like a man who hadn't left the house. "Hey," she said, dropping her carry-on by the foot of the stairs. "You didn't have to wait up." "Wasn't tired," I said. She moved through the kitchen with the ease of someone who believes they know exactly what they're walking back into. She asked about my day, and I gave her a short, accurate answer. I asked about Los Angeles, and she gave me the version she had prepared: meetings, a difficult client, a promising lead for Bellamy Collective. She'd share more about once things solidified. I listened and nodded at the right moments. We ate leftovers standing at the counter because neither of us suggested sitting down properly, and then she said she was exhausted and went upstairs. I washed both plates, dried them, put them away, and went back out to the garage to work on the rear quarter panel until past midnight. In the days that followed, I did not change my behavior in any way Talia would notice. I went to work. I came home. I asked about the Bellamy Collective launch timeline and listened while she answered. I made coffee in the mornings and left her cup on the counter at the temperature she preferred. From the outside, nothing had shifted. That was a deliberate choice, not a passive one. What changed was what I paid attention to. Before the airport, I had extended Talia a kind of automatic trust that builds up over years until it stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like gravity. Now I was watching not with suspicion, but with the focused attention of someone who has been handed new information and is reading a familiar document with different eyes. The transfers in our joint account were individually unremarkable vendor payments, a subscription renewal and office supply order. But laid across 3 months of statements, the pattern was clear. She was routing business expenses through our shared account in a way that blurred the line between personal finances and company finances. I wrote down dates and amounts in a small notebook I kept in my locker at work. Every figure I recorded was information I had full legal access to, sitting openly in accounts we held jointly. I simply hadn't been looking before. I also found the attorney's invoice tucked inside a folder on the kitchen desk. Not hidden, just mixed in with Bellamy Collective paperwork, in a way that suggested she hadn't expected me to go through that stack. The attorney's name meant nothing to me at the time. I wrote it down anyway and put the folder back exactly as I found it. About 10 days after the airport, Betrayal came by on a Thursday evening. Talia was upstairs on a call when she arrived, and I was in the kitchen. I made pasta because it was what we had, and we sat at the table together while Talia's voice moved in faint, indistinct patterns through the ceiling above us. Betrayal talked about her week in the careful way of someone keeping their mind on something specific and manageable. She refilled her water glass twice without asking where the glasses were kept, the way you only do in a house you've been coming to for years. She knew this kitchen better than some people know their own homes. She knew us both. That was the part I couldn't set aside. At one point, I asked her if everything was all right. She looked up from her plate and said she was just tired, that the last few weeks had been a lot. The words were ordinary enough, but there was something behind her eyes that wasn't tiredness. It was the specific flatness of a person carrying something they haven't found a way to set down yet. She left before Talia came back downstairs, and I watched her pull out of the driveway without quite meeting my eyes when she said goodnight. That Sunday, Loretta came for dinner. She arrived the way she always did, carrying a covered dish that smelled like something she'd started the night before, arriving 40 minutes before she'd said she would, wearing the calm certainty of a woman who has already decided the visit will go well. We ate at the dining room table, the three of us, and Talia was lighter that evening than she had been all week, more present, more herself, and I watched that happen, and felt something I didn't try to name. After dinner, while Talia cleared the table, Loretta and I sat together on the back porch in the cool November air. The neighborhood had settled into the quiet of Sunday evenings when everything briefly holds before the week reasserts itself. Loretta looked out at the yard and then turned to me and said, "I want you to know something, Kellen. That name on Talia's company, Bellamy, I gave my blessing for it because I believe it will be carried right. I believe that because of you, because of the man I've watched you be in this house." I told her I understood what that name meant to her. She nodded once slowly, and we sat without speaking until Talia came to the door and told us the coffee was ready. I thought about what Loretta said for a long time after she left. Not because it complicated anything, because it clarified something I already knew about her. She was a woman who meant every word she had ever attached her name to. And when she found out what her daughter had been building that name on, instead the reckoning would come from inside that family. Not from me. 1 week after the airport, I drove to the offices of Desmond Hale on a Tuesday morning and told him everything. Desmond was 55 years old and had been practicing family law in Charlotte long enough that very little surprised him anymore. He had the composure of a man who has sat across the table from people at the worst moments of their lives so many times that calmness has stopped being a performance and become simply where he lives. I had been referred to him by a colleague at work whose brother had gone through a complicated divorce 3 years earlier. I didn't call ahead and explain much. I just asked for an hour of his time. He gave me more than that. I sat across from his desk and told him what I had heard in Baggage Claim 4. Then I set my phone on the desk between us and played the recording from start to finish. Desmond listened without moving. He didn't take notes while it played, he just listened with his hands folded on the desk and his eyes steady on the phone, and when it ended he sat quietly for a moment before he said anything. "What do you want the outcome to be?" he asked. I thought about that for a moment, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to say it correctly. I want to leave with what my father left me intact, I told him. The trust, the house, all of it. And I want the truth to come out at the right time in the right place in a way that can't be walked back or reframed. Desmond looked at me for a few seconds and then nodded with the expression of a man who has just received a clear brief and knows exactly what to do with it. He walked me through the framework carefully. He told me not to confront Talia directly, confrontation before preparation, hands the other party time to position themselves. He told me to continue documenting everything that appeared naturally in front of me. Account statements, invoices, dates of financial transfers. He was specific, only what I had legitimate access to, only what surfaced without me searching for it. He explained the legal structure of the family trust and why, given how my father had set it up and how it had been maintained separately throughout the marriage, Talia's attorneys would face significant difficulty establishing any valid claim. That didn't make the attempt impossible, he said. Only manageable, and managing it required establishing a clear and documented timeline of separation before she initiated anything on her end. Then he said something about the recording that I've thought about many times since. He told me it had real value as evidence of intent. It documented what Talia had planned and what she had already set in motion. But its greatest value, he said, wasn't legal. It was contextual. It was what the recording communicated to anyone who heard it about who this woman was and what this company had been built on. That kind of communication, he said, is most powerful when it reaches the people whose opinion she has staked her reputation on. He didn't tell me what to do with that. He just said it and let it sit on the table between us and moved on to the next item. By the time I left his office, I had a plan, and I want to be clear about what kind of plan it was, because this is where people sometimes misunderstand what happened next. I wasn't trying to destroy Talia. I wasn't trying to take anything from her. I was trying to protect what was mine, tell the truth about what had been done, and let the consequences of her choices land where they belonged. There's a difference between those things and revenge, and I had thought carefully enough about it to know which one I was after. I drove home, changed out of my work clothes, and went out to the garage. I got the driver's side door panel off the Impala for the first time, something I'd been putting off, and worked on the window regulator until I got it moving smoothly. My father had told me once that the door is the last thing most people get right on a restoration. They focus on the engine, the body, the paint, and then rush the details that passengers actually touch. I understood what he meant better that evening than I ever had before. The night of Bellamy Collective's launch arrived on the first Saturday of December. Talia had been building toward this event for months. The venue, the guest list, the catering, the visual presentation of what Bellamy Collective stood for and what it intended to do in this community. She had put genuine care into every detail, and I could see that care when I walked through the door. Round tables with clean linens, framed photographs of Charlotte neighborhoods along the walls, a presentation screen that cycled through the company's stated mission in clean, confident typography. The room held maybe 120 people, clients, potential partners, community figures, a few local media contacts with small press badges clipped to their lapels. The kind of crowd that Talia had spent years cultivating the relationships to fill a room with. Loretta was already seated in the third row when I arrived, wearing the dark blazer she reserved for events she took seriously. She saw me come in and lifted her chin in acknowledgement. Brielle was near the back of the room, managing something on a clipboard, doing the behind-the-scenes work she had always been the one to handle without being asked. Near the side entrance, Grant Sutter stood with a glass of water in one hand and the polished ease of a man who knows exactly how to appear important without making it obvious he's trying. I found a position along the side wall and waited. Talia came out from a door beside the presentation screen to welcoming applause. She was composed and confident, wearing the expression of a person arriving at a moment they have planned for a long time and intend to own. She thanked everyone for coming. She talked about Charlotte, about the community's Bellamy Collective intended to serve, about her mother's legacy, and what it meant to carry that name into something new. She said the word integrity twice. She said the word community 4 times. The room was with her. I could feel it, the particular quality of an audience that is already persuaded and just waiting to be formally invited in. I walked to the front of the room when she reached the end of her opening remarks. I didn't rush it. I moved steadily, the way you move when you've thought through what you're going to do and you don't need to convince yourself anymore. I stepped onto the low platform and several people near the front looked up with uncertain expressions, unsure whether this was part of the program. Talia saw me coming, and her composure shifted not into panic, but into the careful blankness of a person buying time while they calculate their options. I took the microphone from the stand. "I apologize for the interruption," I said. "My name is Kellen Price. I'm Talia's husband, and I think everyone in this room should understand the foundation this company was built on before they decide to invest their trust in it." I opened the recording application on my phone and pressed play. The room heard Talia's voice say that she had stayed in the marriage for the credit score for the house in Matthews, for the financial stability it gave her while she built her company. They heard her say that once Bellamy Collective had 12 months of documented revenue, she planned to leave. They heard her say Grant Sutter's name the way she had said it at the airport with that particular quality of relief. They heard her mention the family trust and the attorney she had retained to look into it. The room was absolutely still. From the third row, Loretta Bellamy stood up. She didn't rush it. She stood the way a woman stands when she has spent decades earning the right to occupy a room with full authority, and she turned and looked at her daughter on the platform for a long moment. Whatever composure Talia had walked in with was gone, replaced by something unguarded and exposed that I had never seen on her face before. Loretta spoke clearly enough that every person in the room could hear her. "Talia," she said, "I put my family's name on what you were building because I trusted who you were. What I just heard is not who I raised." She picked up her handbag from the chair beside her. "As of tonight, I am withdrawing my name, my endorsement, and my support from Bellamy Collective. All of it." She walked to the end of the row, up the aisle, and out the door without looking back. Near the side entrance, Grant Sutter set his water glass down on the nearest table and moved quietly toward the exit. He didn't make eye contact with anyone. He was simply in the room, and then he wasn't. At the back, Brielle stood very still with her clipboard at her side and her eyes on Talia, not moving toward her, not moving toward the door, just still in the way of a person finally arriving at a reckoning they had been postponing for a long time. The tables nearest the front began to shift. A vendor I recognized from a Bellamy Collective planning document, Rose, spoke briefly in a low voice to the person beside him, and both of them gathered their things. A media contact near the window closed his notebook. People began finding reasons to be somewhere other than the room they were in. I set the microphone back on its stand and stepped off the platform. I didn't look at Talia on the way out, not because I was making a point of it, but because I had already said what I came to say, and looking back wouldn't have changed anything. It would only have made the moment about her reaction instead of about the truth. I pushed through the exit door and walked out into the December night. The air was cold and clear, and the city moved around me the way cities do, continuous, indifferent, without drama. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed it in. Then I got in my car and drove home. Desmond filed the divorce paperwork the following Monday morning. The family trust was protected exactly the way my father's attorneys had structured it, held separately, maintained separately throughout the marriage, with a paper trail that Talia's retained attorney reviewed and ultimately declined to contest. The financial transfers I had documented across 3 months of joint account statements were in the file. The invoice I had found on the kitchen desk was in the file. Desmond had told me early on that the clearest cases are almost never the most dramatic ones. They're the ones where someone kept careful records and didn't let their emotions lead them into mistakes. By the time everything was settled, I understood exactly what he had meant. Bellamy Collective did not survive the night of the launch. By the following week, 3 of the 4 anchor clients Talia had lined up for the company's first quarter had withdrawn. The vendor partnerships she had built around the Bellamy name dissolved once Loretta made clear that her endorsement had been formally and permanently withdrawn. The local media coverage ran 2 days after the event, and it was not the coverage Talia had been planning for. I don't know what happened between Talia and her mother after that night. That's not my story to tell. What I know is that Loretta called me once about 2 weeks after the launch and said in the straightforward way she had always spoken to me, "Kellen, I owe you an apology for not seeing what was happening in that house." I told her she didn't owe me anything and that I hoped she was doing all right. She said she was managing. We didn't stay on long. About 10 days after the launch, Brielle came to the house. I was in the kitchen when she knocked. She came in and stood by the table but didn't sit, and she held herself the way she had at Thursday dinner carefully, like someone who has decided to stop holding something and isn't sure yet what will happen once they do. She said she had known, and that she should have said something, and that she was sorry. I looked at her for a moment before I answered. I told her I understood the position she had been put in and that I didn't think she was a bad person. And then I told her the truth because I thought she had earned it. Silence is still a choice, Brielle, and choices have weight. You know that now. She nodded once. She left a few minutes later. I didn't ask her to stay, and I don't think she expected me to. That evening I went out to the garage. Not to sit, I had real work to do. The door seal on the Impala's driver's side needed replacing, and I'd been putting it off. I got the new seal fitted and pressed into place and worked on the rear quarter panel rust treatment until the shop light started making my eyes ache. Then I wiped down my tools and put them away in the order my father had taught me to put them away. The Impala still isn't finished. I'm all right with that. My father used to say that a restoration is never really about the car. It's about the patience. You learn what the car needs and you give it that, and you don't rush the parts that have to be done right. You don't cut corners just to get it done faster. You hold the line on what the work requires, and eventually the work shows you what it was for. I still believe that. I believe it about more than cars. My father told me that a man's worth is measured by what he does when no one is watching. Kellen Price didn't burn anything down. He didn't retaliate out of pain or act while he was still in shock. He waited. He documented. He protected what mattered, and he let the truth do the work when the moment came. Not every betrayal ends with shouting and broken things. Some of them end with a man setting down a bouquet of red roses at the base of a column, walking quietly out of an airport and getting ready to do what needed to be done. That kind of quiet, I think, is its own kind of strength. If this story meant something to you, if you know someone who needs to hear it, share it with them. And if you aren't subscribed yet, join us here. There are more stories like this one, and they're worth staying for.